All right, we're coming to 1 Peter chapter 2. Originally, I was going to look at verses 18 to 25, but immediately found out that was going to be too much material for us to cover in a 10-minute video or less. So we're going to cover verses 18 to 20. You'll notice that what we have here is a new section, a new paragraph. No longer is Peter addressing aliens, their relationship to the world, or citizens' relationship to government. Now, he's talking to servants and their relationship to masters. So that's what's going on here. What is the Christian servant or slave's relationship supposed to be to his master? We find out the servant's responsibility right here, be submissive. And that's exactly what we were told in chapter 2, verse 13, that the Christian is supposed to be submissive to governing authorities. Well, the Christian slave is also supposed to be submissive to his master. That's the basic responsibility. Now, the word masters here, the Greek word is, we get our word despot from it, as despotes. We get despot. It was a person with unlimited power and authority over another person. In the eyes of the law, these servants were owned by their masters like any other tool that they would own. However, I did a little bit of digging and research, and Christian slaves in the first century were quite a bit different from the slaves that we are used to here in the United States from the 1500s to the 1800s. We're used to slaves living in rags, in an old shack with a dirt floor, eating poorly, working tremendous hours. Slaves in the first century were different. They could be doctors, lawyers, skilled workers of various kinds. They often ate well, were clothed well, live in nice parts of their master's home. So it was a different situation, but when it comes right down to the bottom line, they were owned by another person. So what is his responsibility? He's to rank himself under his master. He is to be submissive to, or basically the idea is be obedient to your master. Now, what's his motive in doing so? Why would a Christian servant do that? Well, there's several motives here. He's to do it with all respect. The Greek word is phobos. We get our word phobia or fear from it. So he's to do it with all fear. Now, this might be speaking about the fear of the master, but it also might be speaking about the fear of God. And that actually makes a little bit more sense in the context, because in chapter 1, verse 17, Peter says, conduct yourselves in fear during the time of your stay on earth. And he's talking about the fear of God. And then in chapter 2, verse 17, he says, fear God. So the context surrounding this passage is talking about fearing God. And that actually makes a lot of sense. That would be a great motivating factor for any Christian servant. Because he fears God, he needs to be obedient and submissive to his earthly master. Now, that's not the only motive he's got. We're told here, this finds favor if for the sake of conscience toward God, a person bears up under sorrows when suffering unjustly. For what credit is there if when you sin and are harshly treated, you endure it with patience? But if when you do what is right and suffer for it, you patiently endure it, this finds favor with God. So the second motivation, and these are the same one, let's connect them. We stated twice. The reason why this Christian servant is submissive to his masters is not only that he fears God, but he also wants to find favor with God, which is exactly what happens if he patiently endures suffering at the hands of his master. So, finds favor with God. And then a third motivation, the sake of conscience toward God. The fear of God, favor with God, the sake of conscience toward God. He wants a clean conscience when it comes to his relationship with God. And so he's willing to submit to his earthly master, all for the sake of his relationship to God. So if you just connect all of these, we see that God. God is filled in all of these different motivations for the Christian servant. He loves God. He wants to please God. He fears God. And so he seeks to be obedient in his earthly role as a servant to his master. Now, there's one other thing we're going to see here, and that's the servant's suffering. But first of all, let's take a look at the masters here. Servants, be submissive to your masters. Well, what kind of masters were they? Not only to those who are good and gentle, that's one kind, but also to those who are unreasonable. You had two kinds of masters. Some masters were good and gentle. They had the best interests of their servants at heart. They fed them well, they clothed them well, they took care of their needs, they actually cared for them. In some of these households, these servants were considered part of the extended family. So that was one kind of a master, but you also had unreasonable masters. And we're going to read more about this in a moment. In fact, let's just do it now. For what credit is there if when you sin and are harshly treated? Harshly treated. That phrase in the Greek is the same phrase we have in Matthew 26:67, where it says that they beat Jesus with their fists. So to be harshly treated probably has the idea included in it of a servant receiving a physical beating from his master. So the servant has suffering that he had to endure. And there's lots of words in here that give us that flavor. For this finds favor if for the sake of conscience toward God a person bears up under, there we go, he has to bear up under sorrows when suffering unjustly. For what credit is there if when you sin and are harshly treated, you endure it with patience? But if when you do what is right and suffer for it, you patiently endure it, this finds favor with God. All of these words in green, all of them show us that living the life of a servant often was very difficult and involved suffering. And oftentimes it involved enduring suffering which was not deserved by the servant. And he had to do it with patience, just like his Lord, the Lord Jesus Christ. Peter is going to get into an explanation of how Jesus is our example in our suffering next. That comes in our next study. But all of these words here show you this was a difficult life. It was hard. And this servant, when he did what is right, in other words, served God, loved God, obeyed God, but then he suffered for it. The master lit into him and harshly treated him and perhaps even beat him, but he patiently endured it. That found favor with God. I know that what we're reading here doesn't seem to fit with our modern culture, but a lot of things in the Bible don't. Let's not worry about that. Let's just try to understand what does God say in his word, and then seek to pray and think through this passage to find out how he would apply it in our lives today. Now, slavery has been outlawed in America. We don't have that application, but there's a close parallel in the employee-employer relationship. And sometimes employees have terrible bosses that treat them terribly. And when that's the case, all of these same things would apply as well. So I hope this encourages you to be faithful to God in your employment as a worker, and may God richly bless you.